Hey now, Brawlers, it's time for another Board Game Brawl review with Nick Minahan, sponsored by BoardGameBliss.com. Hey now, today we're going to take a look at Dark Moon from Stronghold Games. Now, Dark Moon has a very interesting backstory. It was originally a print-and-play only game called BSG Express, named so because it was based off of the original Battlestar Galactica board game from Fantasy Flight Games. Now, I have Battlestar Galactica. It's a very enjoyable game to me, but I share a common complaint with a lot of people, and that is that it is a very long game, which makes it very difficult to get to the table. It can be a 3, 4, or even 5-hour game depending on the experience of the players, expansions involved, how many players there are, and so on. The original designer of the print-and-play BSG Express saw this problem as well, and that was the whole point of the game, was to have the same experience of Battlestar Galactica, of being a cooperative game with traitors, these Cylons who are infiltrating the group and having that high level of tension, but having it be faster. In order to facilitate that, they replaced the entire card system with a dice system instead for the voting and for submitting things. And so that is what Dark Moon is. It is the same core system as BSG Express, but with a new theme. Obviously, they couldn't use the Battlestar theme for an officially published game, so this one is more akin to The Thing. You're on this moon of Titan, and there's this strange infection going through all of the crew at this station. You have to determine who the infected are, if you are the uninfected, and then quarantine them and survive through the night or day or whatever it happens to be. And if you are infected, you have to try and, well, kill everybody. But you have to do it in such a way that no one discovers who you are too soon. So it gives you that Battlestar feeling, but in a bit of a different package. Let me go ahead and give you a brief look at how the game is played. Then we're going to come back. I'll let you know what I think. All right, let me give you a brief run-through of Dark Moon. Now, I do have to say one important thing about the production of the game right off the bat. The first production run of the game had messed up screens. These playmats are actually supposed to be scored, die-cut, and folded screens that are standing up like this to protect your dice so other people can't see them. But as you can see, they kind of mess those up in the first run. So what we did in our game was actually use a combination of screens from Roll for the Galaxy and Alchemist. I didn't want to show that on screen because I thought that would be even more confusing. So just try to use your imagination. Your player screen is supposed to be up with your dice behind it. Now, Dark Moon is a team-based semi-cooperative game. You are either going to be uninfected or infected. You're going to get status cards at the beginning of the game that will tell you what you are. If you're infected, you actually have a special power on your card. If you're uninfected, you don't. I'll get back to that. The number of players in the game determines how many infected people there are. It's either going to be 1, 2, or 3, depending on the number of players. If you are uninfected, your goal is just to survive. You're going to have 4 event cards. You'll have normal events. Start off with one at the beginning of the game, and as you complete that one, you go to the next one, and so on. But you'll also have a final event, which will start off on the game board, face up, so you know what's coming, and you have to work towards it, but it is the hardest event out of all of them. If the uninfected team can survive those 4 events without any major catastrophe happening, then they will win the game. However, the infected team can win the game by essentially killing everyone else. There's a few different ways that this can happen. If the shields fail, if the outpost takes way too much damage and is completely filled up with damage, or if the life support systems fail, which is represented in game mechanism terms by every player being fatigued. If any of those situations happen, then the infected team automatically wins because they have led the outpost to complete and utter ruin. All right, now for the setup of the game, I already mentioned that you're going to get a status card at the beginning, and just to clarify that a little bit, if you get an infected card, you're actually going to have a special power. During the course of the game, you'll have the opportunity to reveal yourself as infected, which is a bummer because you don't want the other people to know that you're infected necessarily, but if it so happens and it's the right time, you can reveal yourself and use a special power as long as you're not quarantined. So, for instance, this particular special power says that you can draw 2 fatigue tokens and put them on the board, which is really bad for the uninfected players. But other cards will say things like add shield tokens or add outpost tokens instead. If you have the uninfected card, it doesn't say anything special. It just has a little bit of story blurb. But at the beginning of the game, when you deal out the cards, everyone's supposed to take the time to read their card to give the infected people a little bit of of cover as they read what their special ability is. Every player is also going to get, in addition to a playmat that has their character's picture on it, a character card that will give you a little bit of backstory about the character, but also tell you what their special ability is. Every player has their own inherent special ability. So, for instance, Enver here has, after attempting to repair an outpost, you get to retrieve a die, whereas Steve says that after attempting to repair shields, you can retrieve a die. And let's get one a little more original. Chea says that when drawing task cards, you draw 3, discard 2, and reveal the other. So just a lot of different special effects. Daniel is a clone, and he does not ever become fatigued. So everyone has their own special thing going on. You're also going to take 2 weak red dice and 2 strong black dice. On both of the dice are mostly bad, like mostly negatives. -1, -2, for instance, on the black die. But then you also have a +2 and a +4. But that's really it. So they're not that great. On the weak die, you just have +1 and +3, and then the other sides are -1s and -2s. But you'll have 2 of each of those, and remember, you got to picture that you actually have a screen that you put them behind. Other setup, you'll choose the task appropriate to the task deck appropriate to the number of players. Shuffle it up. You're going to have a little red cube here for the voting track. If this ever fills up, there's a mandatory vote to see if someone goes in quarantine. You have the 3 game-ending condition tracks. You have the shield track, which you're going to start off with 2 on. If more shield tokens come out, then that can be very dangerous. If it ever fills up, then the infected players win, the uninfected players lose. And every time a new shield token gets put on there, after the first 2, which can be repaired, then you have to test the shields, which could make things even worse. Then you have the outpost sections, which will start off with 2 sections damaged at the beginning. So shield control being damaged, these are the 2 I did randomly, means that you can't take the repair action. And the communications being damaged means you cannot issue orders. So that's pretty much how all of these tokens are going to go. As certain areas get damaged, actions that the players can take start to become much more limited. Then you have the life support systems. If things cause you to draw fatigue tokens, you're going to randomize a stack and then draw one and put it out. That will tell you which player becomes fatigued. When you're fatigued, you have to flip over your character card, and it limits the amount of actions that you can take. You can't use your special ability, and you cannot submit more than 1 die during tasks, all of which we're going to get to. And just to clarify, it's probably self-obvious, but not only will the shields cause you to end the game but and lose if you're uninfected, but also if every outpost is damaged and if every character gets fatigued, because then the crazy people can just kill everybody. Over here in this section, you have different supplies. The blue cubes are what you're going to use to keep track of successes on the event cards. And then you're going to have quarantine tokens and these blocked off die tokens. Those are going to represent whenever you get hit by different status effects because of events. So if you are quarantined, you lose 2 dice, or if something else makes you lose a die, you'll take one of those. Sabotage has to do with infected actions, which I'll get to. And then here are all of the dice. Now, you're not going to use all the die necessarily depending on the number of players, but every player should be getting 2 and 2 of the black and reds. The blue die is actually for the commander. At the beginning of the game, you're going to choose one player to be the commander based on shuffling up the fatigue tokens and drawing one at random. The commander is the only person that can use the blue die, which is the best die. It has a +3 and a +5 as opposed to 1 and 2 or 2 and 3. And the commander also has other responsibilities as well. So, for instance, the commander gets to choose the event cards by shuffling them up, drawing 2 and picking 1 at each juncture, except for the final event, which is just randomly dealt out and everyone sees at the beginning. You also break all ties during votes however you like. And if you're ever caught as, or if you ever reveal or are revealed as the infected, you pass your commander card overclockwise to the next infected player. If someone ever reveals as infected, they actually take the special infected shield. You'll notice that these symbols mean the number of dice that you have. If you become infected, you have totally new actions to take, and you also have less dice that you can use. This area is where you put the dice that everyone has spent, and then at the end of the round, they will become available and go into this area. They'll be available for other players to take. And here's where the current task is placed and where the discard pile for those tasks is after you finish, or when you're choosing more than one task and discarding one. Now, the task cards, I'll go ahead and show you those. The task cards are how you're going to go through the events. Now, probably the easiest thing to do to explain the game is just to run you through what a typical turn is going to be like. You'll go in turn order. The first thing that you're going to do on your turn is retrieve all of your dice. So you're going to have a die limit, which for almost all players is going to be 4 at the start of the game. So if you have less than 4 behind your screen, you retrieve dice from the available resources until you're back up to full. And remember, as you spend dice, they go into spent, and then they'll eventually transfer over to available. Then you perform one action, and you have several different things that you can do with that action. One of them is just to try and repair one of the different areas. You have the shield, you have the outpost, and you have the life support section. In order to repair behind your screen, all dice rolls are behind your screen. That is the cardinal rule of this game. And again, for the purposes of this, since I have the bad screens, you're going to have to make believe that there are screens. But for doing a repair, you have to roll up to 3 of your dice, and you can roll whatever dice that you want that you actually have behind your screen. And so long as they're behind your screen, you can say whatever you want about them, but if you ever try to submit them, then that's it. You can't. They're out in the open at that point. But to do a repair, you roll up to 3 of your dice. You submit one of them. Anytime you're submitting a die, you're putting it into the spent pile, and it is locked in as being spent. If there is at least one positive die amongst for the die that you submitted, so you can have as many other dice as you want in any denomination behind your screen, but if the die that you submitted is positive, then you get to remove a token from an appropriate spot. So if I was repairing the shields, I would remove one of the outer shield tokens, or if I was repairing one of the outpost sections here, I get to remove one of those. Now remember, one of the outpost damage sections, the shield control, or if I was fixing life support, I just get to remove one of the fatigue tokens, and it prevents someone, it lets someone flip their character card back over to their non-fatigued side. The next type of action you can take is to do the Lone Wolf action. This is when you desperately want to get one of the blue success cubes onto the event card, and in order to do that, you're going to try to do it yourself. So you roll up to 3 of your dice, submit 2 dice, and if both of those dice are positive, then you get to put one of the blue cubes onto the current event. The next thing you can do is call a vote. You can choose one player to vote on. Say, I'm voting for Billy Bob over there. Everyone holds out a closed fist containing one of their dice from behind their screen. One of the black or the red dice. The commander can't use the blue dice for this purpose. Or they can simply choose to abstain. So they can either hold out an empty fist and then everyone reveals simultaneously, or a black die or a red die. Basically what you're doing is you're voting to see if someone is going to go into quarantine or not. A player that is in quarantine is severely limited in what they can do, but it's something that you might want to do if you suspect someone is going to be infected, because while someone who's infected is in quarantine, they cannot use their special power if they reveal themselves. So if you hold forth a black die, then that means that you're voting that the player is uninfected and you don't want them to go into quarantine. If you're holding out a red die, that means that you think that the player is infected and they should go into quarantine. Whoever has whatever vote has the most, or whatever type of vote has the most votes, or whatever, that player is going to either go into quarantine or not. And remember that the commander breaks ties for all votes. The next type of action you can take is to issue an order. You can choose one player who either performs 2 actions or retrieves 2 of their dice. Now, you can point at a person and say, I'm issuing you an order, and tell them what you would like them to do, but it is totally up to them what they are choosing to do, either retrieving dice or taking 2 other actions, which cannot be issuing orders, by the way. You can't have an infinite loop of issuing orders. And the last type of action you can take, if you are infected, you can reveal yourself as infected. This might trigger your infection power if you are not under quarantine. And also, you get to, every time that your special power is potentially activated, then you get to roll the die, and if that die comes up as positive, you get to do the power again, which might be adding shield tokens, or outpost damage, or fatigue tokens, and so on. In addition, when you reveal as infected, you take a special player screen, and then you have brand new actions you can take on your turn. Now, the amount of actions the amount of dice that you can actually submit during the game is lower than the other players. You only have a maximum of 2, but in exchange, you have a whole bevy of different abilities. Just like the other players take actions, you get to take one action. So for instance, you can do the interference ability, such you draw 3 cards off the top of the task deck and then put them back in the order of your choosing to try to mess everyone up. You can do an energy spike if there's only 0 or 1 shield tokens out on the board. You can add another shield token, and then if you have to, test the shields, which involves rolling a die and hoping that it does not come up as the thing that's on the board, like either a negative or a positive die, which might force you to damage the outpost as well. But every time you have to add a token, you might potentially risk having to test the shields. The next type of action you can take is Sabotage. Sabotage. You're going to add this to one of the different main areas of the game: shield control, outpost status, or life support. If someone tries to repair that section, it's going to cost them 2 extra dice. They have to spend a die just for the repair action, then they have to ditch 2 more dice into the spent resources. They may also test the commander. They force the commander to roll all of their active dice, and if any of the dice are positive, the commander is successful, nothing happens. But if they're negative, that infected player gets to put a damage token of their choice on the applicable area. The last thing that the infected players do, the last option they have for their actions, is to demoralize. Beginning with the first to the infected players left, you can replace all of their active black strong dice with red weak dice until there are no more weak dice left in the available resources. Now, after the player has done their action for the turn, whether they're infected or not, then it is time for the task. That player is going to draw 2 cards off the top of the task deck, choose one that they want to play, and then put the other one on into the discard pile so that the other players can't see it face down. Then you're going to put the other one face up in this section. Now, there's 2 different types of cards. There are these, I think they're just called like challenge cards. So for instance, life support malfunction, it'll have a difficulty, a consequence, and it may say suspicious activity at the bottom. If it says suspicious activity, then you have to move the suspicious activity cube up. If that ever gets to the vote section, there's a mandatory vote at the end of the round to quarantine someone. What the difficulty means, you're going to set the difficulty track, this cube here, at a 6. That is the threshold that you have to meet or exceed in order to succeed at this challenge. The consequence is how bad it's going to be if you fail, which in this case means you'd have to, for life support malfunction, you would have to put out one of these fatigue tokens, and one player would end up being fatigued at that point, on top of perhaps anyone else. But for instance, this one here is a little bit easier, the difficulty 4 for another life support malfunction card, but this consequence is 2, and that one also says suspicious activity. Alternatively, they could be complication cards, and every complication card has a different choice that has to be made. Usually by the active player. So you choose a player to call a vote on. If they are quarantined, the task succeeds. If not, the task fails, and you must draw a fatigue token. Or choose a player. If they show you and you alone their status card, the task succeeds. If they refuse, the task fails, and you must draw an outpost token and damage a part of the station. Or another example, choose another player to give you one of their dice permanently. If they agree, the task succeeds. If they refuse, the task fails, and you must draw an outpost token. But if you succeed on any of these tasks, that lets you add one of the small blue cubes onto the event card. If you get enough of them, it's going to pop, and you'll be able to move on to the next one. Now, the challenge events, the one that actually require you to meet a difficulty threshold, how those are going to work is that starting with the active player and moving around, first thing you do is decide whether you are in or out. That is what this token is for. If you're in, you are bound to submit at least 1 die to the current challenge. If you're out, you immediately get to collect 2 die if they're available from the available resources, and assuming you actually have the upper limit to take more dice based on the fact that you are only allowed to have a limited amount of active dice in your dice pool. But if you're in, once you go all the way around the table, it goes back to the first player that is actually in, and then you roll your dice behind your screen at that point, not before, and then submit a die into the spent resources. For every positive that you submit, you get to you start at 0, and you get to move forward, hopefully getting closer to the difficulty of the current challenge. For every negative that you submit, obviously you're going back down. Now, you can submit more than 1 die, but that also requires you to re-roll the dice that you have and then submit again. You can keep doing this until you run out of dice if you want to. And remember, this is all behind a screen, and you can lie and say whatever you want that for the stuff that's actually come up on your dice. If after everyone who is in has had a chance to submit dice, you end up meeting or beating the difficulty number, you get a cube on the card, and that's that. If, however, you fail, then you do not get a cube on the card, and you have to take the consequence, which could be adding more damage to the station. And then remember afterwards, if the mandatory vote happens because of the suspicious activity, then you have to do that vote and potentially quarantine someone. And that's really the core of the game. Remember that your goal is to get to the final event. So, for instance, Escape here says that once you hit the final event, you have to reshuffle the deck and make a new task deck by taking out all of the complication cards and only having the challenge cards. And then you have to deal with whatever the effect is here. So the Escape final event says that during it, whenever the outpost tokens are drawn, draw an additional one. And you see that you have to have 3 cubes in order to complete that final event. So it's just like a much nastier version of the regular events. Since I don't even know if I showed you the regular event cards, but for instance, blood testing here says that upon completion of the event, the commander must either quarantine a player or release someone from quarantine. And you'll be adding cubes to those events just as normal. Whenever you finally complete one, you'll pop it, and then you will move on. The captain will take 2 event cards, choose one, put it out there, and do this. And then you're going to try to complete all 4 events, the 3 normal ones, and the main one. And if you're an infected player, try to hide yourself as long as possible and then strike at the right time. If you're an uninfected player, try to root out those infected people and just survive. That is a quick and dirty, well, not that quick, but a dirty run through of Dark Moon. Let's get to my final thoughts. Now, I'll do something a little bit unusual here and tell you right up front and kill some of the suspense. I like Dark Moon. I found it to be a very enjoyable game. And the reason I'm telling you that up front is that usually at the very beginning of my final thoughts, I tell you about the theme, the components, the artwork. And those, for Dark Moon, are its biggest weak points and the thing that I had the most problem with. So before I go into bashing it, the first part of this final thoughts, I just want to let you know ahead of time, I did enjoy the game. Now, as far as the presentation here, this is just an ugly game. I was really, really disappointed in the artwork on the cards, the graphic design, the text layout. The board looks very drab and dull. Everything about the game, even I didn't like the wooden dice even. It just looks like a very boring game. And I understand the feeling that they were going for. Sort of that, here's what the future looks like if you're a person from the 80s. If you think about the original Alien movie and how the computers look really quaint to us now, the ones they use on the Nostromo, because that's all that they knew for technology back then, and their special effects wouldn't let them conceive of something that looked grander than that. Or if you think about the Fallout video games where it's like high tech and there's lasers and there's powered armor and there's robots, but the computers look like, an old Commodore. That's, I think, the feeling they were going for with Dark Moon as well, but it ends up just looking very ugly. So I was pretty disappointed in that. Even the box doesn't look good, and I don't understand why they felt the need to put formerly BSG Express on the bottom, as if more than 2% of the public that would see that on the shelf would even know what that is or what the backstory was. So not happy with the presentation at all. Also, the theme, so generic. I understand that they couldn't go for the original Battlestar. I absolutely understand that. Or they couldn't even go for any other kind of licensed property because it's just too expensive. Got it. You don't have to. The thing is, other games, like if you want to just take Battlestar out of the picture and think of other analogous games, you can think of Dead of Winter or even Shadows over Camelot, which managed to have a very interesting theme, a very vibrant theme that worked for those particular games. Even though, in the case of Dead of Winter, zombies are totally played out, very cliche at this point, but they managed to just make these characters and these storylines come to life, this whole setting, and there's none of that in Dark Moon. I never felt like, oh, we're in the Moon of Titan and there's all this tension and, oh, look at these interesting characters. The characters just felt very drab, and I was not invested in the storyline of the game at all. I was invested in the storyline going on between myself and the other players, which is how it should be in a cooperative trader game, but I still would have liked the extra flavor of being in a living world of this game, and I just never got that. I felt very detached from the theme. Okay, bashing is done. Let's talk about the good stuff, and that is how the game plays. This is a very, very interesting game. When you think about Battlestar, one of the interesting things about that game was that your cards, which you use to submit, to vote, to go through all these different crises, are also have special abilities, and you can use them for that instead. And while that is very cool, it also adds to the length and the complexity of the game. Rather than have that system, you are submitting dice in this game. And while that might seem a little bit boring, like, oh, just roll some dice and submit them, there's a lot of tension there because you're rolling behind your screen and you might just roll poorly. Most of the sides are negative, but the other players don't know that. You can't show them. And you're like, no, I swear to you, I've only had to submit negative dice the last 3 times because I've rolled terribly. I'm like, oh yeah, right, traitor. And the thing is, you have special powers and you have ways to get more dice, and there is a strategy to the game, and you can just be out of the voting if you want to and just get some more dice back. But even doing that can make you look suspicious. It's all about the challenges you're willing to take, and when you're willing to be in, when you're willing to be out. And constantly being judged by the other players just adds this whole level of tension to the game that I really didn't expect. I didn't think I would like the dice system as much as I ended up liking it. But when you add that together with the challenges and the complexity and the different consequences and what are acceptable losses, like let's let the shields go for a couple, or look at that event card. If we can complete that event, we get to wipe the reward is we get to wipe away all the damage to one sector. So who cares? Let's just let that go. Or is that what a traitor would say? So there's a lot of interesting aspects to the game. I like that every character has their own power and feels distinct from one another. I do like the whole way that the event system works, where it's not just you trying to pass one card. You're working on a card over and over again and trying to get through that. And you see that final event that's very tough all the way at the end there. But you just know that it's coming, and you already know that it's tough for you, and it's just more daunting having to think about that. If I was going to complain about the gameplay, I would say that it is very, very difficult for the infected people. I would even say play with the variants in the back right off the bat, the ones that make it easier for the infected, because otherwise it's tough. This game offers you no cover. You submit that die, it is out there. People can make their own judgments. You can't hide behind anything the way you kind of sort of can in Battlestar. It's just very tough if you're the infected, and there's just a steep learning curve there. To be an awesome liar, you always have to be on the ball, and sometimes it's just not going to be in your favor. I found that some of the challenges, especially the complication tasks, are just very, very easy for the uninfected people to pass. And you're like, oh, okay, you guys just swapped die? Well, we've just got a cube on there, and we can't let too many cubes go through if you're an infected player. But what can you do if the tasks are really simple? And that just happens sometimes. So I wish it was a little bit more difficult for the infected. But I will say that I like the way the infected powers work. It's very easy to use your power if you're not quarantined. You get all these cool things you can do. You can sabotage. That's an old in-joke, by the way, whenever I say that. I like that you've got all these different options you can do. I know that in Battlestar, if you're the Cylon, you have some options when you reveal. It didn't feel as cool as it did in Dark Moon. It felt like I had more to do here, like I was still active and engaged, even when I was revealed, even though you don't want to do that until the last possible minute when it's really going to help you. And knowing when to do that is another layer of interesting strategy to the game. So there is a lot to like in the actual gameplay of Dark Moon. I really wish that the presentation was better, but even so, I found it very fun, very enjoyable. It does not replace Battlestar for me, but neither do I think does Battlestar invalidate this game. I think they feel distinctly different from each other. And that's a good thing, because I think that a lot of people who would not be willing to give Battlestar a shot but still want to give the Traitor game a shot, I do think that Dead of Winter and Shadows are better for me than this game, but Dark Moon still has a place and is still very cool. I love the dice mechanism. That is Dark Moon from Stronghold Games. Check it out.
Thanks for watching. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Patreon. And make sure to check out our sponsor, Board Game Bliss, where you can find an amazing selection of games from around the world. BoardGameBliss.com. Thanks for your support.